14 years ago, I believed Nathan Cole was the man who understood me better than anyone. On the night of our 14th anniversary, I learned how wrong I had been. Rosemere was full that evening. The house was glowing from the inside, the dining room was prepared for nearly 50 guests, and every room carried the kind of polished warmth Nathan loved to show people. He had invited business partners, investors, a real estate broker, old friends, and several people I barely knew. He called it an intimate celebration. I remember standing near the staircase and watching everyone arrive. At the time, I was already uneasy. For months, Nathan had been changing in small ways that were easy to explain away and difficult to ignore. His phone was always face down. Our joint account had begun showing expenses I did not recognize. Vanessa Reed, a marketing consultant who worked closely with Nathan, appeared in more meetings than some of his senior employees. Sometimes I would ask about her and Nathan would tell me I was reading too much into ordinary business. Then his language toward me changed. I was becoming too emotional, too suspicious, too sensitive. He never said those things when other people were around. He saved them for quiet rooms, usually after I had asked a question he did not want to answer. One evening, months before the anniversary party, I questioned him about a large charge on our account. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise. It lasted only a few seconds. The next morning, there were flowers on the kitchen counter. He apologized without really apologizing. He told me we both needed to be gentler with each other. I accepted the flowers, I went to work, I kept the marriage moving. Looking back, I know I had already seen the truth. I simply was not ready to call it by its name. That night at Rosemere, the first thing that finally made the truth impossible to ignore was not Vanessa. It was my mother's chair. My mother had died years earlier, but that chair had remained in the dining room, exactly where she had always kept it. It was an old walnut chair with a worn leather back. Nothing about it was expensive compared with the rest of Rosemere, but every family dinner had centered around that chair. Nathan knew what it meant. Vanessa knew too. Yet when I walked into the dining room, Vanessa was sitting in it. She looked comfortable. Nathan stood beside her, smiling as though nothing was unusual. I walked over and stopped a few feet away. That's my mother's chair. Vanessa did not move. Nathan looked at me, then at the chair, and gave a small laugh. "It's just a chair, Claire." That sentence stayed with me, not because of the chair itself, because of what it told me. Nathan knew exactly what that chair meant to me. He had sat across from my mother at that table. He had listened to her stories. He had watched her touch that wooden armrest whenever she was thinking. He knew, and he had chosen to make me ask for it back in front of a room full of people. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult Vanessa. I did not make the scene Nathan seemed to be waiting for. Instead, I stepped back and looked around the room. That was when I noticed something else. Several of the guests were not really anniversary guests. Two men near the fireplace were investors I had seen in Nathan's business meetings. A woman standing beside the bar was a real estate broker. Another guest had spent most of the evening talking about development permits. Even the seating arrangements suddenly looked different to me. Nathan had pleased people according to business relationships, not family relationships. He kept moving through the room, introducing Rosemere as if it were part of his professional portfolio. He called it the heart of our family, but he said it while talking to investors. I watched him shake hands. I watched Vanessa stay near him. I watched him point toward the windows and describe the property, the land, and the future he claimed he was building. And then I noticed something else that bothered me more than the chair. Nathan was not celebrating our anniversary. He was presenting something. For months, I had thought the strange expenses, the hidden phone, Vanessa's growing presence, and his sudden habit of calling me unstable were separate problems. Standing there that night, they began to look like pieces of the same picture. I still didn't know what he had planned. I didn't know about the documents, the money, or the property deal waiting behind the scenes. But for the first time, I stopped asking myself whether I was imagining things. I started asking a different question. Why would my husband need investors at our anniversary party? And why did he seem more interested in convincing them than celebrating with me? That was the first moment I wondered whether my anniversary party had been planned for me or for the people Nathan needed to convince. The morning after our anniversary party, I woke up with the feeling that something had changed. I was still thinking about my mother's chair, about Vanessa sitting in it, about Nathan introducing Rosemary to people who had no reason to be at our anniversary dinner unless the house meant something to them beyond being our home. I had not slept much. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and saw an email from North Atlantic Bank. At first, I thought it was a routine message. It wasn't. The bank wanted me to confirm a loan application for $24 million. The collateral listed on the documents was Rosemary. I read the amount twice, $24 million. Then I read the name of the borrower. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I had never applied for that loan. I had never agreed to use Rosemary as collateral. Most importantly, I had never signed the authorization attached to the application. The bank's file stated that Nathan had authority to act on behalf of the family trust. That was not true. I knew because my mother had created the trust carefully, and after her death, the structure had been explained to me more than once. Nathan could live at Rosemary during our marriage. He could help manage ordinary household matters, but he did not own the property, and he did not have the right to pledge it for a business loan. I called the bank directly. I did not call Nathan. That decision mattered. I asked the bank to place an immediate hold on the loan and to prevent any funds from being released. I requested a complete copy of every document connected to the application, including the authorization, the trust paperwork, the appraisal, and the communications between Nathan's company and the bank. Then I opened the signature page. At first glance, it looked like mine. That was what frightened me. The handwriting had the same slant, the same long curve at the end of my last name. Even the pressure looked familiar. But I knew my own signature better than anyone else did. 14 years earlier, when Nathan and I married, I signed my name in a different way. After my mother died, I changed my signature. It was a small change, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. The signature on the loan documents was my old signature, not my current one. Whoever had copied it had gone looking through an old document, and suddenly the past 14 years felt less like a marriage and more like a file cabinet someone was quietly studying. I called Elena Brooks, the trust attorney I had worked with since my mother's estate was settled. I sent her everything the bank had given me. While she reviewed the documents, I changed every password I could think of: banking, email, cloud storage, investment accounts, even the security system at Rosemary. Then I asked the bank to preserve every email, login record, call record, and digital signature connected to the application. I did the same with the house cameras. I knew enough by then to understand that memories could be argued with. Records were harder to argue with. Elena called me later that morning. She had found something. It was not just the forged authorization. Buried in the records was a draft deed prepared to move Rosemary out of the family trust and into a newly created company. There was also a proposed listing agreement. A broker had already been contacted. The estimated sale price was $57 million. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at that number. $57 million. That was the moment the story changed. Until then, I had been trying to understand whether my husband was cheating on me. Now I understood that the affair was only one part of something much larger. Nathan had been preparing to take my home. The plan was simple enough to understand. He would use my forged authorization to secure $24 million against Rosemary. He would use the money to help launch his new development project. Then he would sell Rosemary for an estimated $57 million, transfer what he could, and disappear from the life we had built together. Vanessa was not simply the woman he was sleeping with, she was part of the plan. Her name appeared in correspondence connected to the proposed sale, and the documents suggested she expected a substantial commission when the property changed hands. I sat there for a long time without calling Nathan. There was a question I could not stop asking myself. Why didn't I leave him months ago? I had seen the phone. I had seen the strange expenses. I had seen Vanessa. I had even seen the bruise on my own wrist and accepted flowers the next morning. For years, I had confused keeping the peace with protecting my family. Elena did not tell me that I should have known better. She did not ask why I had stayed. She simply reminded me of something I had never understood before. Knowing something is wrong and being ready to act are two different things. That distinction mattered because I was ready now, and for the first time in 14 years, I was not going to protect my marriage from the truth. I was going to protect myself from it. The morning after I learned about the $24 million loan, I stopped thinking like a wife trying to understand her husband and started thinking like a woman trying to understand a plan. Elena had already helped me freeze the loan. The trust records were being reviewed, the draft deed was secured, and the broker documents were preserved. But one question remained. Why had Nathan chosen that anniversary party? I went back through the digital records I had saved from our shared devices. I was not looking for gossip anymore. I was looking for sequence. Dates, names, decisions. That was when I found the messages between Nathan and Vanessa. One thread, sent before the party, made everything clearer. Nathan was talking about me as if I were not his wife, but a problem he needed to manage. He had written that I would fold when pressure became public. He was not talking about the loan, he was talking about the party. The more I read, the more the evening at Rosemere made sense. The guest list, the investors, the broker, Vanessa in my mother's chair, Nathan watching me instead of the celebration. The party had been designed to create a reaction. Nathan wanted me angry in front of witnesses. He wanted me to lose my temper, say something reckless, perhaps leave the house on my own. If I became emotional enough, he could tell everyone that I was unstable. Those people would remember the scene, not the documents behind it. Then the story could move in his favor. I realized the anniversary dinner had not been the beginning of his plan. It had been one of its stages. That changed what I did next. I could have confronted him immediately. I could have sent the messages to everyone who had attended the party. I could have called Vanessa and demanded an explanation. Instead, I showed everything to Elena. She read the messages carefully and warned me that I did not need to prove anything that night. I understood. Nathan wanted me to prove his version of me. If I walked into that house determined to expose him, he could turn my anger into evidence. So I made a different decision. I would go back to Rosemere, not because I believed Nathan, not because I wanted to save the marriage, not because I was too afraid to leave. I went back because I still did not know the full extent of what he was preparing. I had discovered the loan, the draft deed, and the planned sale, but I did not yet know what Nathan would do when he realized I knew something was wrong. That mattered. I was no longer walking into the house as a wife hoping for an explanation. I was walking in as the person responsible for protecting herself. Before the party, I made a list of everything that needed to be protected. I backed up every document I had. I sent copies to Elena. I asked the bank to monitor any new request connected to the loan, the trust, or Rosemere. I asked for the house security footage to be preserved rather than overwritten. I saved the relevant emails and messages in multiple locations. Then I called my father, Richard. I told him what I had found and what I planned to do. His first instinct was immediate. He wanted to send people to Rosemere that day. I stopped him. I did not want armed men at the house or a confrontation. I did not want Nathan claiming I had brought an army to intimidate him. More importantly, I needed to make my own decision. I told my father that I did not need him to save me. I needed him to be ready if I called. He understood. For the first time in our relationship, he didn't try to take the decision out of my hands. He simply asked what I needed him to prepare. That mattered. I also made one promise to myself. I would not bring a weapon. I would not hire anyone to hurt Nathan. I would not threaten Vanessa. I would not post accusations online. I would not give either of them the reaction they were expecting. If Nathan wanted a public explosion, he would have to create it himself. My job was to watch, to listen, to remember, and to keep the evidence safe. There was a risk. Nathan had already crossed a physical line with me once, so Elena helped me prepare a simple safety plan. I would keep my phone charged, I would have transportation available, Elena would know where I was. My father would remain close enough to respond if I called, but far enough away that Nathan wouldn't see him coming. It was not revenge, it was a plan for choice. When I arrived at Rosemere that evening, I could see through the windows that the house was already filling with people. Nathan was inside, Vanessa was inside, the investors were inside, and somewhere in that house was the man who believed he knew exactly how I would behave under pressure. He thought I was walking into his trap. He did not understand that I had stopped walking into it blindly. I was going there to observe, and for the first time, I was going to let his actions tell me who he was. The moment I walked back into Rosemere, I knew Nathan was waiting for me to make a mistake. The house looked exactly as it had the night before. Warm lights, crystal glasses, music low enough for business conversations, guests moving between the dining room and the living room as if nothing had happened. But I was different. I had already seen the messages. I knew the anniversary party had been part of Nathan's plan. I knew he expected pressure to make me lose control. I also knew several people in that room had been invited for reasons that had nothing to do with celebrating 14 years of marriage. So I walked in quietly. Nathan saw me almost immediately. He changed his expression in a second. The cold man I had seen at home disappeared, replaced by the charming husband everyone else knew. He smiled, touched my back, and welcomed me as if we had spent the previous night laughing together. That was Nathan's talent. He could change the story without changing the facts. For the next hour, I watched him work the room. He shook hands with investors, he introduced people to one another. He spoke about Rosemere, our family, and the future with the confidence of a man who believed the house already belonged to him. Vanessa stayed close. She was wearing a dark green dress I recognized immediately. Nathan had bought it for her several weeks earlier. I had seen the charge on our account and asked him about it. He called it a business expense. Now I knew who the business was. Later, I saw Vanessa return to my mother's chair. She sat there as comfortably as she had the night before. I walked over. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I simply looked at her and said, "Please move." She smiled without moving. Nathan came over almost immediately. He lowered his voice and reminded me that we had guests. He said I was embarrassing him. I looked around the room. That was when I noticed 3 phones pointed in our direction. Not openly, not obviously, but enough. Someone was recording. For a second, everything became clear. Nathan did not need me to be wrong. He needed me to look unstable. He had chosen the guests. He had created the pressure. He had placed Vanessa in my mother's chair. And now he was waiting for me to explode. I could have given him exactly what he wanted. Instead, I stepped back. I remember thinking that I had spent 14 years protecting Nathan from the consequences of his own choices. I was not going to spend another minute protecting him from the truth. Vanessa finally stood, but she did it slowly, almost theatrically. She said something under her breath that I could not fully hear. I did not answer. Nathan moved closer. His face had changed again. The smile was gone. His hand closed around my wrist. It was the same wrist he had bruised months earlier, only this time I knew what I was looking at. I knew it was not a misunderstanding. I knew it was not a moment of stress, and I knew there were cameras recording it. I told him to let go. He did not. Instead, he pulled me toward the front door. The room became strangely quiet behind us. I could hear the music continuing, but the conversations had stopped. I did not fight him. Not because I was afraid to fight, because I understood the situation. The stone steps outside were wet and beginning to freeze. Nathan was stronger than I was. The security cameras were running. People were watching. If I fought back and fell, he could say I had attacked him first. If I screamed, he could say I was unstable. If I struck him, even once, he could turn the entire night into the story he had prepared. So I kept my hands visible. I let the cameras see what was happening. Nathan opened the door and pushed me outside. My knee hit the stone step. Pain shot through my leg. Before I could stand, the door closed. I heard the lock. For a few seconds, I simply sat there. The cold came through my clothes quickly. My knee throbbed. My hand was still shaking from where he had grabbed me. Through the glass, I could see Vanessa standing near the fireplace. She had returned to the warmth. The guests were still inside, and Nathan was standing behind the door. I could have pounded on the glass. I could have screamed his name. I could have tried to force my way back inside. For one brief moment, I wanted to. I wanted to make them all feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But then I looked down at the ice covering the stone beneath me. I thought about the cameras. I thought about the phones. I thought about the story Nathan had been trying to create, and I understood that my anger was exactly what he needed. So I stood up carefully. I brushed the snow from my coat. I checked my knee. Then I took out my phone. I did not call the police. I did not call Alina. I called my father. He answered almost immediately. I said only 4 words. "Dad, I'm ready." Then I waited. For the first time that night, I was not waiting for Nathan to open the door. I was waiting for the truth to come through it. The moment I said, "Dad, I'm ready," I knew the night at Rosemere was about to change. I stayed outside for only a few minutes before headlights appeared at the end of the drive. My father had not sent one car. He had sent a small convoy. A black SUV came first, followed by 2 more vehicles. Alina Brooks was in the second car. With her were a bank representative, a forensic accountant, and a financial fraud investigator. No one came carrying weapons. No one came shouting. They came carrying folders. That distinction mattered to me. My father had listened when I told him not to rescue me. He had waited until I called. But he had also spent those minutes making sure the people who arrived could do something more useful than intimidate Nathan. They could document what had happened and protect what still belonged to me. I was still standing near the steps when my father got out. He looked at my coat, my wet hair, and the way I was favoring my injured knee. He did not ask me to explain everything. Elena already had the documents. The bank already knew about the frozen loan. The investigators had the records I had sent them. The evidence had arrived before the people did. Nathan opened the front door when he saw the vehicles. He stepped onto the porch wearing the same controlled expression he had used all evening. Then Nathan tried to explain why I was outside. He said I had become emotional and that they had simply been giving me space. I remember how strange that sounded while I was standing in the cold with a bruised knee. I walked back toward the porch and corrected him. "No, you dragged me outside." My father did not raise his voice. He did not threaten Nathan. He looked at him, then at the locked door behind him, and asked the only question that mattered. Why is my daughter standing outside her own house? Nathan had no answer. Alina moved past us and began laying the documents across the entry table. First came the trust documents. Rosemere belonged to the Bennett family trust. Nathan had no ownership interest in the property and no authority to pledge it for a $24 million business loan. Then came the authorization attached to the loan application. The signature looked like mine, but it was not. Elena explained that the power of attorney Nathan had relied on was invalid. The bank representative confirmed that the $24 million loan had already been frozen and that no funds could be released while the fraud investigation continued. Nathan remained silent. The next document was the draft deed. It showed an attempt to transfer Rosemere from the family trust into a newly created company. Then came the broker records. The proposed sale price was $57 million. I watched Nathan look at the papers one by one. For the first time that night, he stopped looking at me. He looked at the documents. That's when one of the investors who had attended our anniversary party stepped forward. He had spent most of the evening listening to Nathan describe his development plans. Now he was holding a copy of the project proposal. He asked Nathan why he had told the investors that the Bennett family had guaranteed the project. Nathan said nothing. The silence answered for him. Then the forensic accountant opened a separate folder. Inside was a ledger covering money Nathan had raised from multiple investors. The total was $31 million. That number changed the room. Until then, some people could still have believed this was a private dispute between a husband and wife. It was not. There were other people whose money was involved. But what made the situation more complicated was that Nathan hadn't invented an entirely imaginary project. The land was real, the architects were real, the permits were real, the development plans were real. He had created a legitimate-looking project around an illegitimate financial plan. That was what made the deception so dangerous. He had used real professionals, real property, real paperwork, and real investors to make the fraud look like an ordinary business venture. And Rosemere was supposed to be the foundation that gave the whole thing credibility. I stood there, listening as the accountant explained the movement of money and the difference between the funds raised for the project and the money Nathan had actually committed to development. The documents were doing the talking for me. Vanessa was still inside, near the fireplace. She had not said a word. The investors were now realizing that Rosemere had been presented as security for a project they had never fully understood. Nathan had wanted witnesses to my supposed breakdown. Instead, he had gathered witnesses to his own deception. I looked at the cameras mounted around the entrance. I thought about the phones recording earlier. For once, I was grateful that Nathan had wanted everything documented. He believed a public scene would destroy my credibility. He had not considered that the same cameras could preserve the truth. My father stayed beside me without touching me or speaking for me. That mattered too. He had promised to be ready when I called. Now he was, and I finally understood something I had not understood when I walked into Rosemere that night. I had spent years believing that protecting a family meant keeping its problems inside the house. But sometimes keeping a family safe means opening the door and letting the truth come in. The next morning, I thought the worst part was over. Nathan had been exposed, the $24 million loan had been frozen, the documents proving the attempted sale of Rosemere were already in Alina Brooks' hands, and my father's team was working with the bank to preserve every record connected to Nathan's project. I wanted to believe that meant I could finally breathe. I was wrong. Alina called me before breakfast and told me that the investigators had found another storage unit connected to Nathan. It was not listed under his name. It had been rented through a small company that appeared nowhere in our family records. I went with Alina and Marcus Hale, our forensic accountant. I did not know what we would find. By then, I had learned not to expect anything from Nathan except another layer of deception. The unit was cold, windless, and almost painfully ordinary. Inside were boxes, metal cases, and several locked cabinets. Then Marcus opened the first cabinet. There were 17 luxury watches. I recognized some of them because Nathan had once told me that certain watches were investments. At the time, I had believed him. Now Marcus was photographing serial numbers and matching them to invoices that had nothing to do with watches. The next cabinet contained 8 envelopes of cash. Not 1 or 2, 8. Each envelope was labeled with a date and amount. There were also multiple passports, several external hard drives, and property documents that had never been signed. Some were for land I had never heard Nathan mention. Marcus became very quiet as he went through the files. That was how I knew the numbers were worse than I expected. The ledger showed that Nathan had raised $31 million from investors for the development project, but most of that money had not gone into construction, permits, or legitimate project costs. And then we found the transfer schedule. $11 million had been prepared for an offshore account. The money had not disappeared yet. Nathan had been getting ready to move it. That distinction mattered. It meant the plan was still active. For 6 years, I had thought Nathan was simply ambitious. I had complained about his long nights, his secretive phone calls, and the way every conversation eventually became about another deal. I had never imagined that he had been building a financial escape route while standing beside me at our own dinner table. But the money was not the thing that frightened me most. It was a folder hidden inside one of the hard drives. The folder was called Claire Containment. I stared at the name for several seconds. Alina opened it. Inside were drafts from a reputation management company Nathan had hired. They had already prepared articles and social media material describing me as unstable, jealous of my husband's success, dependent on medication, and emotionally incapable of handling stress. One document suggested that my behavior at the anniversary party could be presented as evidence that I was spiraling. Another contained photographs of me leaving a clinic. I knew the photograph immediately. My mother had died years earlier, and I had gone to that clinic during the months when grief had made ordinary days difficult. It had been a counseling center. I had never hidden that I went there. Nathan's people had changed the caption. They described it as recent psychiatric treatment. I felt something inside me go completely still. Suddenly, the anniversary party made sense in a way I had not wanted to understand. Nathan had not only wanted me out of Rosemere, he wanted witnesses. He wanted people to see me upset. He wanted recordings. He wanted a story in which I looked unreasonable before anyone had a chance to examine his documents. And if I had lost my temper that night, his version of me could have reached the internet before the truth ever had a chance. That was when I understood the real danger. Nathan was not simply trying to steal my property. He was preparing to steal my credibility. He knew that if people believed I was unstable, every accusation I made afterward could be dismissed as the anger of a bitter wife. For a few minutes, I sat there looking at that folder. I thought about opening my phone and telling everyone. I could have posted the documents. I could have shown the photographs, the offshore transfer, the cash, the watches, and every message we had found. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. But anger would have given Nathan one more thing to use. So I did something much quieter. I asked Alina to preserve everything and make certified copies. Marcus secured the financial records. The investigators documented the storage unit and every item inside it. Then I gave one short statement. I will not litigate facts through rumor. The evidence will speak through the proper legal process. That was all. I did not call Nathan. I did not attack Vanessa. I did not post a single photograph. For the first time in months, I understood that staying calm didn't mean I was weak. It meant I was refusing to let Nathan choose the battlefield. He had spent years preparing a story about me. Now he would have to face the facts. The next piece of the investigation came quietly. Marcus found that the $11 million we had traced in Nathan's records was not sitting untouched in some account. It had been prepared for transfer. The instructions were ready. The offshore account was ready. The only thing missing was the final authorization. At the same time, investigators discovered something else. Nathan had been preparing to leave the country. There were travel arrangements, copies of documents, and a short list of people he intended to contact after he was gone. It became clear that he had not been planning to stay and defend himself if the investigation closed in. He had been preparing an exit. What I learned next was harder to watch. Vanessa believed she was part of that escape. She had spent months beside Nathan, helping with his project and believing, or at least telling herself, that she was more than his mistress. She thought the two of them would leave together once the money was moved. But Nathan had never planned to take her. The person listed in the travel arrangements was Sophie Grant, his 28-year-old project assistant. Sophie had worked closely with Nathan. She knew schedules, brokers, files, and internal project details. To him, apparently, that made her useful. Vanessa's reaction reached me through Elena. She had been devastated when she learned the truth. For a moment, I almost expected myself to feel satisfied. I did not. There was no victory in watching another woman discover that she had been used. Vanessa had helped betray me, that was true. I would never pretend otherwise. But by then, I understood something about Nathan that had nothing to do with me, Vanessa, or Sophie. He had never really built relationships. He built ladders out of people, and when one person could no longer take him higher, he simply looked for another. That realization changed how I saw Vanessa's next decision. She contacted Elena. At first, I was suspicious. I had every reason to be. But Vanessa brought information Nathan had never expected her to surrender. She gave us the location of another storage site. She provided passwords she had been trusted with. She turned over broker records, messages, and project documents she had kept on her devices. Some of those records filled gaps in our timeline. Others showed exactly how Nathan had moved information between his personal accounts, his companies, and the people working for him. Vanessa was not suddenly innocent, but she was finally telling the truth. I understood that those were two different things. Then Nathan called me. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the night he locked me outside Rosemere. He did not apologize. He did not ask whether I was safe. He went straight to a threat. If I go down, your father goes down with me. For a second, the next piece of the investigation came quietly. Marcus found that the $11 million we had traced in Nathan's records was not sitting untouched in some account. It had been prepared for transfer. The instructions were ready. The offshore account was ready. The only thing missing was the final authorization. At the same time, investigators discovered something else. Nathan had been preparing to leave the country. There were travel arrangements, copies of documents, and a short list of people he intended to contact after he was gone. It became clear that he had not been planning to stay and defend himself if the investigation closed in. He had been preparing an exit. What I learned next was harder to watch. Vanessa believed she was part of that escape. She had spent months beside Nathan, helping with his project and believing, or at least telling herself, that she was more than his mistress. She thought the two of them would leave together once the money was moved, but Nathan had never planned to take her. The person listed in the travel arrangements was Sophie Grant, his 28-year-old project assistant. Sophie had worked closely with Nathan. She knew schedules, brokers, files, and internal project details. To him, apparently, that made her useful. Vanessa's reaction reached me through Elena. She had been devastated when she learned the truth. For a moment, I almost expected myself to feel satisfied. I did not. There was no victory in watching another woman discover that she had been used. Vanessa had helped betray me, that was true. I would never pretend otherwise. But by then, I understood something about Nathan that had nothing to do with me, Vanessa, or Sophie. He had never really built relationships. He built ladders out of people, and when one person could no longer take him higher, he simply looked for another. That realization changed how I saw Vanessa's next decision. She contacted Elena. At first, I was suspicious. I had every reason to be. But Vanessa brought information Nathan had never expected her to surrender. She gave us the location of another storage site. She provided passwords she had been trusted with. She turned over broker records, messages, and project documents she had kept on her devices. Some of those records filled gaps in our timeline. Others showed exactly how Nathan had moved information between his personal accounts, his companies, and the people working for him. Vanessa was not suddenly innocent, but she was finally telling the truth. I understood that those were two different things. Then Nathan called me. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the night he locked me outside Rosemere. He did not apologize. He did not ask whether I was safe. He went straight to a threat. If I go down, your father goes down with me. For a second, I felt the old instinct to protect my family. Nathan knew exactly where to press. My father, Richard Bennett, had built his company over decades. His name was respected, and I knew that even an accusation could damage everything he had worked for. Nathan claimed he had evidence of old wrongdoing connected to my father's company. He suggested that if I cooperated with him, those records could disappear. If I did not, he would make sure they became public. I could have hidden it. That was the hardest choice I had faced since this began. I had spent my life believing that protecting family meant standing between them and anything that could hurt them. But there is a difference between protecting someone and protecting their secrets. So I told my father everything. We agreed that the records should be investigated independently, even if the truth was uncomfortable. The investigation found an old environmental violation with one of my father's companies. My father had not personally ordered anyone to break the law, but years earlier, the company had delayed reporting contamination for 9 weeks. 9 weeks. It was long enough to matter. It was serious enough that pretending otherwise would have made us no better than Nathan. My father could have fought the finding. He could have pointed to managers who had handled the reports. He could have used his lawyers to slow things down. Instead, he chose something harder. He agreed to disclose the violation, cooperate with regulators, compensate those affected, and allow an independent investigation into what had happened. I watched him make that decision, and something inside me changed. Until then, I had thought this story was about taking back what Nathan had tried to steal from me. Now I understood it was bigger than that. Nathan had tried to teach everyone around him that truth was something you could negotiate when enough money was involved. I no longer wanted to live that way. I did not want to protect my family by hiding his company's mistake. I wanted to protect him by making sure we were willing to live with it. That was the moment I understood the difference. I was no longer protecting my family by covering the truth. I was protecting my family by making sure we were willing to live with it. By the time Nathan was formally charged, I had already learned something I wish I had understood years earlier. A marriage can end long before the paperwork says it has. The charges were serious: fraud, forgery, financial conspiracy. The investigation had followed the money, the false documents, the investor records, and the plans Nathan had made behind my back. There was no dramatic courtroom speech from me. I did not need one. The evidence had finally become louder than his explanations. Our divorce came afterward. 14 years of marriage ended with signatures on papers that felt strangely ordinary. No shouting, no last-minute promise from Nathan that he had changed. I'd already heard enough promises to know what they were worth. Nathan still tried to reach me. He sent a letter. At first, I thought it might contain the apology I had once wanted. Instead, even in that final letter, he found ways to make himself the victim. He blamed Vanessa for pushing him. He blamed my father for making him feel powerless. And somehow he blamed me too, saying that I had become cold and distant. I read the letter once, then I gave it to Elena. I never met Nathan again. Through my lawyer, I sent him only one sentence. I don't hate him. I just don't need him to understand me anymore. That was the truth. For a long time, I thought healing would mean getting something back from Nathan: my home, my dignity, my peace, maybe even an apology that finally sounded sincere. But I eventually realized I did not need to take anything from him. I needed to decide what I would do with what was left of my life. Rosemere was still standing. The house Nathan had tried to use as collateral had become something completely different in my mind. It was no longer the place where he had humiliated me. It was no longer the house where Vanessa had sat in my mother's chair while I stood there trying to understand what had happened to my marriage. So I gave the house a new purpose. I called it the Rosemere House. I did not build it as a place where I would rescue women. I had learned that rescuing someone can sometimes create another kind of dependence. Instead, I built a place where women could regain choices. Some came because their husbands controlled every dollar they earned. Some were fighting over property. Some had experienced abuse at home. Others had been manipulated through legal documents, joint accounts, business agreements, or threats. By the time Nathan was formally charged, I had already learned something I wish I had understood years earlier. A marriage can end long before the paperwork says it has. The charges were serious: fraud, forgery, financial conspiracy. The investigation had followed the money, the false documents, the investor records, and the plans Nathan had made behind my back. There was no dramatic courtroom speech from me. I did not need one. The evidence had finally become louder than his explanations. Our divorce came afterward. 14 years of marriage ended with signatures on papers that felt strangely ordinary. No shouting, no last-minute promise from Nathan that he had changed. I'd already heard enough promises to know what they were worth. Nathan still tried to reach me. He sent a letter. At first, I thought it might contain the apology I had once wanted. Instead, even in that final letter, he found ways to make himself the victim. He blamed Vanessa for pushing him. He blamed my father for making him feel powerless. And somehow he blamed me too, saying that I had become cold and distant. I read the letter once, then I gave it to Elena. I never met Nathan again. Through my lawyer, I sent him only one sentence. I don't hate him. I just don't need him to understand me anymore. That was the truth. For a long time, I thought healing would mean getting something back from Nathan: my home, my dignity, my peace, maybe even an apology that finally sounded sincere. But I eventually realized I did not need to take anything from him. I needed to decide what I would do with what was left of my life. Rosemere was still standing. The house Nathan had tried to use as collateral had become something completely different in my mind. It was no longer the place where he had humiliated me. It was no longer the house where Vanessa had sat in my mother's chair while I stood there trying to understand what had happened to my marriage. So I gave the house a new purpose. I called it the Rosemere House. I did not build it as a place where I would rescue women. I had learned that rescuing someone can sometimes create another kind of dependence. Instead, I built a place where women could regain choices. Some came because their husbands controlled every dollar they earned. Some were fighting over property. Some had experienced abuse at home. Others had been manipulated through legal documents, joint accounts, business agreements, or threats they did not fully understand. I hired attorneys who understood family assets and financial abuse. I brought in financial specialists who could help women understand their accounts and debts. Counselors joined the team. Social workers helped with problems that could not be solved in a lawyer's office. The goal was simple. We did not tell women what their lives should look like. We helped them understand their options well enough to choose for themselves. And then there was my mother's chair. I could have thrown it away. For months, I hated looking at it. I remembered Vanessa sitting there, Nathan dismissing me, and the quiet humiliation of realizing that something sacred to my family meant nothing to them. But eventually, I moved the chair into the library. It was no longer a throne. It was no longer a symbol of power. It became an ordinary chair. A woman could sit there, close the door, take a breath, and tell someone what had happened without being interrupted or judged. I remember one afternoon when a young woman came into the library. She looked frightened, but she had clearly spent a long time trying to hide it. She sat down in my mother's chair. After a few quiet minutes, she looked at me and asked, "What do I do first?" I did not tell her that I would fix everything. I pulled the chair closer to the table and answered, "First, we make sure you have a choice." That was the moment I finally understood what winning meant. I had once believed winning meant taking Rosemere back from Nathan. It did not. Winning was not making the person who hurt me suffer. It was waking up one morning and realizing that person no longer had the power to decide who I was. And that, more than anything Nathan lost, was what I finally gained.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in? And what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.